The desert evening settled heavy over Dry Creek, a town that looked more like a memory than a living place. Wooden shutters creaked against the wind, lanterns flickered above silent doorways, and the sky bled from gold into black. Somewhere in that fading light, a woman walked alone. Her name was Clara Whitmore, a widow who carried the weight of her husband's death like a second shadow. Clara was no stranger to whispers. Folks in town said her husband died quick in a duel that wasn't his to fight. Others swore he carried secrets to the grave, debts, betrayals, even a hidden promise. Whatever truth lay buried, Clara lived with the fallout. She kept her head down, ran the small boarding house he left behind, and spoke to no one unless she had to. But Dry Creek had a way of digging up what you wished to keep hidden. That night, Clara's steps slowed as she neared the saloon. The Silver Spur stood at the heart of town, its windows alive with lamplight, piano notes, and rough laughter. She never liked stepping inside. It smelled of whiskey, sweat, and too many lies, but tonight felt different. Something in the air pressed against her chest, pulling her forward. Inside, smoke hung thick. Cards slapped against tables, boots scraped on wooden floors. A voice called out above the noise, "Another round for the boys on the house." The crowd cheered, but Clara barely heard them, her eyes fixed on the man in the corner. Eli Mercer, a tall stranger with a weathered coat, a face marked by road dust, and eyes that seemed to measure the room like a gun sight. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't laughing. He just waited, as if the whole saloon were a stage and his moment was about to arrive. Clara tried to leave before anyone noticed her, but the piano stopped. The chatter thinned. Eli rose from his chair, slow and deliberate, boots echoing against the wooden floor. Across the room, another figure stepped out from the crowd: Jonas, Black Jack, Kincaid, a gambler with a cruel smile and a pistol always near his hand. The air froze. Clara's heart thudded. She'd seen men face off before, but something about this moment felt different. It was quieter, deadlier. Kincaid smirked. "Didn't think you had the guts to show, Mercer." Eli's reply came low and steady. "I didn't ride all this way for whiskey." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Bets whispered. Chairs scraped back. Someone knocked over a whiskey glass that shattered on the floor. Clara's feet rooted in place. She wanted to look away, but she couldn't. Eli's hand hovered near his holster. Kincaid's fingers tapped against his pistol grip, and then, like the desert wind cutting through silence, a gunshot cracked. The saloon gasped, lantern light flickered, and a cowboy hat tumbled into the dust-streaked floorboards. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She didn't yet know it, but what had begun in that saloon would unravel every secret she thought buried with her husband's grave. The smoke didn't clear so much as thin into ribbons, twisting like ghosts above the crowd. For a breathless second, no one moved. The desert wind carried the silence after the gunshot, and even the piano seemed to hold its breath. Kincaid's smile faltered. His hat lay upside down on the floorboards, rocking to a stop, brim full of sawdust and shame. Eli Mercer stood steady, arm still extended, as if the shot had frozen time around his wrist. But there was no blood, no body crumpling to the planks. Only a neat hole in the playing cards nailed to the support post, the Queen of Hearts cut clean through. A murmur spread, half disbelief, half fear. Someone laughed too loudly, and then swallowed it. Kincaid's eyes flicked to the card, then back to Eli. "You missed," he said, trying to sound amused. Eli lowered his gun with the care of a man setting down a memory. "I didn't come here to kill you." Kincaid's fingers flexed over his own pistol, the reflex of a rattler. He wanted the room to see him as the kind of man who could turn a moment to his advantage. But there was something unfamiliar in Eli's stillness, like a quiet river you guessed was deeper than it looked. Clara felt her pulse in her throat. She was surprised to find her hands clenched at her sides, nails pressing crescents in her palms. She realized she had been bracing not for death, exactly, but for the shattering of whatever thin order kept Dry Creek from collapsing into the dust. The bartender, a square-shouldered man with a careful moustache, found his voice. "No shooting in the spur unless the house declares a contest," he warned, wiping at the same spot on the bar that he'd been polishing for years. Eli turned, holstered his pistol, and gestured to the blasted card. "Call that my entry fee." Laughter broke like hail, quick, sharp, then gone. Kincaid's grin returned, counterfeit as a painted coin. "What is it you did come for, Mercer?" "To ask a question." Eli's gaze swept the crowd and landed, to Clara's surprise, on her. "And to hear an honest answer." Clara's breath hitched. She hadn't said a word, hadn't moved. Yet the stranger looked at her as though the question had been waiting inside her all along. Before she could speak, the batwing doors creaked, and Sheriff Albright pushed through, the weight of the town riding on his badge and his tired shoulders. He scanned the room, saw the punctured card, the restless crowd, the drop of tension clinging to every lamplight. "Do I need to lock up the spur for the night?" he asked. "No trouble, Sheriff," Kincaid said, sweet as molasses left out in the Sunday. "Friendly demonstration. Mr. Mercer here is an artist." Albright regarded Eli with a flat look that had cooled many tempers. "We prefer paintings that don't make holes in my walls." But then the sheriff's eyes moved to Clara kindly, curious. "You all right, Mrs. Whitmore?" She nodded. Yes." Her voice surprised her with how steady it sounded. Albright lingered, as though deciding which simmering pot might boil first, then tipped his hat. "Keep it civil." He stepped back out, his shadow sliding off the doors like a page turning. The saloon tried to resume its rhythm cards, resumed slapping. The piano plinked a cautious tune, but a current stayed under the floorboards. Eli crossed the room the way a man crosses a river, reading the flow, testing the stones. He stopped a pace from Clara. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said softly, "I'm sorry to trouble you, but I need to ask about your husband." Her name on his tongue made the room recede. "My husband is dead." "I know." Eli didn't flinch. "He died carrying something that wasn't his." Kincaid drifted closer with the slow drift of oil on water. "Now this is interesting." Clara felt the eyes of Dry Creek hook into her like burrs. She hated the way gossip could turn a person into a spectacle. Yet the stranger's tone held no accusation, only a steady ache, like a rider speaking to the trail that had cost him miles. "What do you think he carried?" she asked. Eli glanced toward the bar, where the bartender had politely pretended not to hear 100 secrets. "Not here." He tipped his head toward the rear, where a narrow hall led to a shaded courtyard, and the mercy of night air. Clara hesitated. The last time she'd been led into a conversation by a man who claimed he knew more than she did, she'd ended up burying a husband and a future together. But something in Eli's eyes reminded her of the quiet after thunder, the world rearranged by a sound that couldn't be unsaid. "All right," she said. 2 minutes. They stepped into the courtyard. Crickets sowed the edges of the silence. The moon laid a silver band across the trough, and the scent of wet wood rose where someone had spilled a bucket. Eli spoke first. "Your husband, Thomas Whitmore, worked for the telegraph outfit running lines east of here. He also kept a ledger." He watched her closely. "Do you have it?" Clara felt the name of the book drop through her like a stone through water. She'd found it weeks after Thomas died, tucked beneath a loose floorboard under the boarding house stair, wrapped in oiled cloth and tied with twine. She had touched it once and then set it back, the way a person touches the name carved into a headstone. "If I did," she said carefully, "why would it matter to you?" "Because that ledger contains a map, and the map points to a cache of promissory notes. Kincaid and his partners have been laundering through half the rail towns between here and Abilene." Eli's jaw tightened. "Including the note that cost my brother his ranch." The courtyard felt smaller, the moon nearer. "You're saying Thomas was part of it?" "I'm saying Thomas was caught between men who own knives and men who own the law." Eli's voice was gentler now. "I think he meant to set it right. The way he died. Wrong street, wrong hour, wrong witness says he waited too long." Clara looked at the saloon's rear door, where laughter rose like a pot coming to boil. Why come to me? Because a man trying to fix a wrong leaves the truth where he thinks it will be safest, Eli said, with the person he believed would know what to do. Clara stared at her hands. She thought of the ledger's weight, the way it seemed to hum with names and numbers that could turn into rope for some men and keys for others. She thought of the nights she sat up alone. The lamp flickered out, trying not to read meaning into the scuff of passing boots. If I had such a book, she said, bringing it into daylight would get people hurt. That's why you don't bring it into daylight, Eli answered. You bring it into the right hands. And yours are the right hands? Eli considered. No, but I know where they are. The door creaked. Kincaid slipped into the courtyard, hat back on, smile threaded with curiosity. Funny thing about secrets, he drawled. They prefer company. Mrs. Whitmore, a word? Clara's spine straightened. I'm done talking tonight. Kincaid's eyes glittered. Your late husband owed me a favor. Debts don't vanish when the debtor does. There's an accounting to be made, and I'm a patient man when the sums are large. He tipped his head toward Eli. This drifter tells fine stories, but I settle in ink. Eli stepped slightly forward, not crowding, but placing himself between Clara and the gambler, with the kind of instinct you don't learn, you remember. Kincaid's smile thinned. I don't want trouble in my courtyard, he said softly. Tomorrow at noon, Mrs. Whitmore. We'll discuss your husband's affairs properly. Bring whatever books you keep, and bring a witness. His gaze flicked to Eli. If you must. With the sheriff present, Clara said. Kincaid's laugh was polite and empty. Of course. He tipped his hat and drifted back inside, the door sighing shut behind him. Eli exhaled, a sound like dust leaving a room. He won't wait for noon, he said. He'll move tonight, in the dark corners that belong to him. Clara looked toward the alley where the town's night collected. She understood now that grief had not emptied her life. It had only made more room for danger. Then we don't wait either. Eli glanced at her, weighing the steel in her voice against the risk in the air. Where is it? Clara met his eyes. Follow me, and keep your steps quiet. They left the courtyard by the back gate, slipping along the narrow run of alley where the town's heartbeat sounded in distant hooves and the clink of a lonely spur. The boarding house sat 2 streets over, dark but awake in the way empty houses are holding their breath for who might enter. Clara unlocked the door, guided Eli to the staircase, and knelt at the third riser. Her fingers found the loose board by feel, as they had the first time, as if the wood had learned the shape of her touch. She pried it up, reached into the cool space, and drew out the oiled bundle bound with twine. It was heavier than she remembered, or perhaps her hands were lighter now that fear had shifted into purpose. Eli kept watch at the window, eyes on the street. Anyone, she whispered. Not yet. Clara set the bundle on the table, the twine cut against her thumb. She paused, listening to the house, to the night, to the small voice that had kept her alive since Thomas died. Then she loosened the knot. The ledger opened on its brittle spine, pages crowded with columns like fence lines running to an unseen horizon. Names, dates, numbers, and tucked against the backboard, flattened between leather and hope, a map scratched in faded ink, its edges singed, a trail marked not by towns but by initials. A shadow slid across the window. Eli's hand hovered near his holster. Clara closed the book by instinct, breath caught. Boot steps on the porch. A whisper at the latch. Someone had not waited for noon. The sound of boots on the porch was measured, deliberate, as if the man outside wanted them to hear each step. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. She closed the ledger with both hands and slid it back into the bundle, the twine loose but still enough to hide its face. Eli tilted his head, eyes locked on the door. He's not alone, he murmured. Clara moved toward the oil lamp but hesitated. The glow would make them targets. Instead, she let the room stay dim, the moon spilling faint silver through the curtains. Eli's hand rested on his revolver, but not with urgency, more like a prayer a man keeps ready in case silence fails him. The latch shifted, a voice followed, smooth and oily as lamp smoke. "Mrs. Whitmore, forgive the hour, but debts don't sleep." Kincaid. Clara felt the chill of recognition run through her veins. He hadn't waited for dawn, just as Eli said. Behind the gambler's words came the whisper of movement, two, maybe three men shifting their weight on the porch planks. Eli leaned close, his voice no more than breath. "Do you trust me?" Clara swallowed hard. "I don't have the luxury not to." He gave a single nod. Then he crossed the room and pressed himself against the wall beside the door. Clara stepped back, clutching the bundle against her chest. The latch lifted. The door swung wide. Kincaid entered with a lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. Two of his hired men followed, shadows long against the floorboards. Their faces were half hidden by the glow, but their eyes searched quick, hungry. "Evening, ma'am," Kincaid said, doffing his hat with mock courtesy. "And Mercer, always where you shouldn't be." Eli's gun was already out, angled low but steady. "You step 1 inch farther, and you'll answer for it." The tension strung tight across the room, every second a taut wire ready to snap. Clara steadied her voice. "You said tomorrow. Sheriff present. That was the agreement." Kincaid chuckled, a sound like dice in a cup. "Agreements are for men who need them. I just need what your late husband owed." His eyes fell to the bundle in Clara's arms. "And I'd wager I know what's wrapped in that cloth." Her grip tightened. She wanted to deny it, to bluff, but she knew her eyes would betray her. Eli stepped forward. "This isn't yours, Kincaid. Everything in this town is mine if I can put my mark on it." Kincaid's pistol raised a fraction, the lantern flame jittering across the walls. "Hand it over, and maybe you'll both walk away with less trouble." Clara felt the weight of choice settle heavy as iron. The ledger was more than numbers. It was truth, dangerous truth. Giving it up meant surrendering Thomas's last attempt at redemption, but holding it meant a bullet might find her before sunrise. The room stilled. A chair creaked somewhere distant, wood settling like an old judge leaning forward to hear a case. Then Eli moved first. Not reckless, measured, precise. His revolver snapped up, the barrel trained on the lantern in Kincaid's hand. The shot cracked. The lantern exploded, glass and flame bursting into darkness. Shouts filled the room as shadows lunged, half seen in the smoke and firelight. Clara dropped low, clutching the bundle, her body pressed against the floorboards as sparks hissed and died. A fist collided with wood, a pistol scraped metal, and Eli's voice cut through the chaos. "Clara, out the back!" She scrambled to her feet, the ledger under her arm, and rushed for the rear door. Behind her, boots thundered, shots cracked, and the desert night opened wide like a throat waiting to swallow her whole. Outside, the wind hit cold and fast. She stumbled into the alley, lantern light spilling faintly from the saloon 2 streets over. Her breath came sharp, clouds in the moonlight. She heard Eli's steps behind her, then his hand on her shoulder, guiding her forward. "They'll regroup," he said, low and urgent. "We can't stay here." Clara nodded, her voice failing her. Together they ran, shadows stretching long as if the night itself wanted to keep them. From the house behind, Kincaid's laugh rose through the smoke, harsh and certain. "You can't outrun debt, widow. The desert keeps its own books." Clara clenched her jaw, the ledger pressed against her ribs, heavier than ever. She knew then that her husband's secrets had never truly died, and now they were hers to carry. The alley spit them out into the open street, where moonlight washed the clapboard facades and shadows stretched like gallows. Clara's skirts caught the dust as she ran, the bundle clutched tight against her chest. Beside her, Eli's strides were long, measured, like a man who knew every second counted, but refused to waste a step. Behind them, shouts echoed Kincaid's men spilling from the boarding house, curses tangled with the clatter of boots and the cock of pistols. Dry Creek, usually asleep at this hour, stirred in doorways and windows as lamplight blinked awake. Eli steered Clara into a narrow side street, a cut between the livery and the church. The scent of hay tangled with the acrid sting of gunpowder on his coat. He stopped, pressed his back to the wall, and peered out toward the main road. "They'll expect us to run for the edge of town," he said. "We need a place they won't look." Clara leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "There's nowhere in Dry Creek Kincaid doesn't own." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then we hide where ownership means nothing." He led her across the yard behind the church, where headstones leaned tiredly in the soil. The graveyard spread quiet under the moon, a place the living seldom lingered. They crouched behind a weathered angel carved in stone, its wings chipped and moss-bitten. Clara pulled the bundle close. "You knew this would happen." "I knew Kincaid doesn't wait for sunlight." Eli wiped his brow with his sleeve. "He's not after you, Clara. He's after what you carry. That ledger is a thorn in the paw of every man he's partnered with, and a noose for him if it reaches the right hands." Her voice trembled, but she held his gaze. "And you expect me to believe my husband meant for me to hold all this?" Eli's tone softened. "I expect you to believe he trusted you more than anyone else alive." The words struck her harder than the gunfire had. For months, she'd lived with the echo of Thomas's absence, wondering if his death was sacrifice or cowardice. Now, hearing Eli frame it as trust carved a hollow in her chest where grief and anger had long wrestled. Before she could speak, the sound of boots crunching gravel carried over the fence. Lantern light flickered against headstones. Clara froze. Eli pressed a finger to his lips. The glow grew nearer. 2 men, maybe 3. They moved slow, cautious, their whispers a trail of smoke in the night. "Search everywhere," one muttered. "Kincaid wants that book before dawn." Clara's pulse hammered. She pressed her back against the stone angel, breath shallow. Eli crouched low, hand on his revolver, eyes calculating distance and timing, but the men passed without turning. Their lantern light faded, swallowed by the far end of the yard. The silence that followed was heavy, almost holy. Eli stood, offered Clara his hand. "We can't stay here. The longer we linger, the closer they get." She took his hand, and they slipped from the graveyard into the open desert beyond the church fence. The sand stretched silver beneath the moon, ridges of sagebrush and the long spines of yucca casting sharp shadows. The night air was cool, but Clara's skin burned with the urgency of their flight. They walked fast, each step a prayer the ground wouldn't betray them. When at last they reached the ridge overlooking the town, Eli paused. He looked back at Dry Creek, the lanterns glowing, voices carrying faint on the wind. "That ledger holds names tied to more than this town," he said. "Men with influence across the frontier. Kincaid's just the front teeth of the wolf. The jaw's bigger, and it's hungry." Clara hugged the bundle close. "And what do you want with it, Eli?" "Justice. Revenge." He considered, jaw set against the horizon. "Both. My brother's ranch was stolen with ink and lies. That ledger proves it. I aim to set it right, not just for him, but for every man ruined by Kincaid's games." Clara's voice was quiet. "And if the price is blood?" Eli looked at her, steady. "Then it's blood Kincaid's already spilled." For a long moment, neither spoke. The desert stretched wide and merciless, yet Clara felt a strange steadiness take root. Danger pressed from behind, uncertainty waited ahead, but for the first time she wasn't standing alone. Below them, a coyote yipped, the sound carrying like a question across the sand. Eli turned toward the north, where the land fell into canyons. "There's a place we can lie low. Old miners' camp, 3 hours on foot. If we move now, we'll beat dawn." Clara nodded. The ledger weighed heavy in her arms, but heavier still was the knowledge it carried. A knowledge that would change not just her fate, but the fate of men who believed themselves untouchable. As they started across the ridge, the desert wind lifted, carrying grit against their faces. Clara glanced back once more at Dry Creek. In the distance, a lantern swung outside the silver spur, its light swaying like a warning or a promise. She whispered to herself, though Eli might have heard, "Thomas, whatever you left me with, I'll see it through." And with that vow stitched into the night, they vanished into the desert, shadows swallowed by the endless horizon. The desert night stretched wide and merciless, stars scattered like silver dust across the heavens. Clara's legs ached from the climb, her breath catching in her chest with each rise of the trail. Eli walked ahead, steady and unyielding, the kind of man who measured distance not in miles but in endurance. By the time the ridge broke into a canyon pass, the first tint of dawn ghosted the horizon. Shadows sharpened into stone spires, the walls rising on either side like silent jurors. The wind funneled through, carrying the scent of dry sage and iron. "We're close," Eli said, pausing at a bend. He crouched, brushing his fingers over the dirt. Clara leaned to see. Hoofprints pressed into the sand, fresh, the edges still crumbling. Her heart quickened. "They're following us," Eli nodded. "Riders. 2, maybe 3, not far behind." He rose, jaw tightening. "We can't lead them straight to the camp. We'll have to shake them." Clara clutched the bundle tighter. The ledger's corners pressed into her ribs through the cloth, as if reminding her of its weight. "What if we can't? Then we make the canyon choose between us." Eli's eyes swept the cliffs. "Come on." They pressed deeper into the gorge, the path narrowing until they walked single file. Clara's boots slipped on loose rock, but she forced herself onward. The silence broke with the faint echo of hooves behind them, distant but steady, a predator's rhythm. Eli led her up a sloping ledge, jagged rocks biting through the soles of her shoes. From there, the canyon widened into a shelf that overlooked a dry wash below. He crouched, scanning the shadows. "Down there," he said. "We'll draw them in." Clara's breath hitched. "You mean to fight them? I mean to give us a chance to keep running." His tone carried no bravado, only the certainty of a man who'd weighed every risk and found the scale fixed. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing against the canyon walls. Clara crouched beside Eli, clutching the bundle like a lifeline. She wanted to pray, but the words tangled. Instead, she listened to the stones shifting, to the wind brushing the cliffs, to Eli's breath steady beside her. 3 riders appeared below, lantern light bobbing from one saddle. Kincaid's men. Their voices carried faint on the air. "You sure they came this way? Tracks don't lie." Eli's hand rested on his revolver. "Stay low," he whispered. Clara pressed herself against the stone as Eli raised his pistol. He didn't aim for flesh. His shot cracked the silence, striking a boulder above the riders. Stone shattered. Rocks tumbled. The canyon roared with falling debris. The horses spooked, rearing and bucking, throwing one rider hard into the dust. The lantern smashed, flames licking briefly before dying in the sand. Shouts erupted. One man scrambled to calm his horse. Another dragged his partner to his feet. Eli fired again, striking another ledge. More rocks thundered down, clouding the canyon with dust. "Go!" Eli grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her back along the ridge. They ran, boots skidding, lungs burning. Behind them, the men cursed, but the echoes drowned their words in stonefall. They didn't stop until the canyon bent wide and the walls fell back, opening into a stretch of desert lit by the first red blush of sunrise. Clara collapsed to her knees, clutching the bundle. Her chest heaved, her throat raw. Eli scanned the horizon. "That bought us time." "Not much, but enough." She looked up at him, the rising sun painting his face in fire and shadow. "You risked killing them. I risked stopping them," he said, voice firm. "There's a difference." Clara pressed her palms against the earth, steadying herself. "And if you had missed?" Eli looked down the canyon, where the dust still hung. "Then fate would have chosen for us." The silence stretched, broken only by the wind. Clara realized her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the weight of choice she hadn't asked for. The ledger wasn't just paper and ink. It was blood waiting to be spilled, lives waiting to be judged. Eli offered his hand. We keep moving. The camp's another hour ahead. Once we're there, we'll decide the next step. Clara took his hand, rising with a steadiness she didn't fully feel. The canyon behind them whispered of pursuit, but the horizon ahead promised something else. Uncertainty, danger, maybe even redemption. As they walked, she dared a question she hadn't before. Eli, why are you helping me, truly? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, because men like Kincaid count on fear to silence the truth. And I've been silent too long. Clara studied his profile, the hard lines carved by dust and distance. In him, she saw not just a gunslinger, but a man bound by scars unseen. The sun broke free of the horizon, spilling gold across the desert. And though the weight of the ledger still pressed heavy, Clara felt something stir within her chest, something she hadn't felt since before Thomas died. Not safety, not peace, but the beginning of resolve. The sun climbed higher, painting the desert in fire and shadow. Each step carried Clara deeper into a world she barely recognized, yet one she could no longer turn from. The bundle pressed against her ribs, its weight unyielding, its promise whispering louder with every mile. By mid-morning, the canyon spilled into a plateau scattered with scrub and rock. Ahead, half-buried timbers jutted from the earth, remains of an old miner's camp, long abandoned to dust and wind. Sagging beams marked where a shack once stood, its roof caved in, walls tilting like drunks at a saloon table. A rusted ore cart lay on its side, filled with sand instead of silver. Eli stopped, scanning the horizon. This is it. No one's worked these hills in 20 years. Safer than staying in town. Clara followed him inside the shack, her boots crunching over glass and splinters. The air smelled of rust and desert weeds. In one corner, a stone hearth still bore the black scars of old fires. Eli set down his saddlebag, shook the dust from his coat, and tested the walls with a firm push. They held, though barely. We'll rest here till nightfall, then decide where to take that ledger. Clara eased onto a beam that had fallen like a bench. She unwrapped the bundle, laying the ledger on her lap. Its leather cracked beneath her fingers, the pages heavy with more than ink. She opened it, though her stomach turned at the sight. Columns of numbers marched across the parchment, but woven between them were names she recognized. Merchants from Dry Creek. A rancher's widow she'd once traded eggs with. Even the preacher's cousin, who'd left town after debts swallowed his farm. Her throat tightened. They're all here, she whispered. Every lie, every theft. Thomas wrote them all down. Eli leaned over, scanning the page. His jaw clenched. And more. Look here, railroad contracts, signed and dated. The same notes used to foreclose half the valley. Clara's fingers brushed the ink. The ledger no longer felt like her husband's secret. It felt like a curse passed from his hands to hers. Eli closed the book gently. This is proof. With it we can drag Kincaid into the light. Him and every man who hides behind his smile. Clara shook her head, voice trembling. And how many will fall with him? These names, their neighbors, families. Not all guilty, not all cruel. Some just desperate. Eli's eyes softened. Truth cuts clean, Clara. It don't choose who bleeds. Silence lingered. Outside, the wind rattled loose boards, carrying the faint cry of a hawk circling above. Clara closed the ledger, bound it again, and set it aside. You talk like a man chasing justice, she said, but I think you're chasing something else. Eli looked toward the horizon, his face unreadable. Maybe I am. Before Clara could press him, a sound cut through the stillness, hooves on rock, faint but unmistakable. She froze, every muscle taut. Eli was already on his feet, pistol drawn, eyes sharp. They tracked us. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing down the canyon walls. Clara's breath hitched. How? We left no trail. They don't need a trail when greed's their compass. Eli motioned her toward the back of the shack. "Stay low." Shadows stretched across the doorway as riders crested the ridge. Clara caught a glimpse, 3 figures this time, rifles glinting in the Sunday. Not Kincaid himself, but his men, and men eager to prove themselves. One called out, voice cruel with confidence, "No use hiding, Mercer. We saw your smoke." Clara's heart sank. She hadn't even noticed the faint curl from the hearth, a careless ember Eli had kindled to boil water. A mistake, small and deadly. Eli crouched beside her, his voice low, steady. "There's an old shaft behind the shack. If it's stable, it'll lead you out the other side. What about you?" He gave her a ghost of a smile. "I'll keep their eyes." "No," Clara whispered fiercely. "I won't run again while someone else bleeds for me." The riders dismounted, boots crunching, rifles cocked. The shack trembled with their approach. Eli's hand rested on her shoulder, brief but firm. "This isn't just about you, it's about everyone in that book. You carry their voices now. Don't let them be silenced." The door burst open. Sunlight and dust poured in with the men. Eli rose from the shadows, gun drawn, eyes calm as a man who'd stood in this moment too many times before. Clara clutched the ledger to her chest. For the first time, she felt its weight not as a burden, but as a torch, and torches were meant to burn. The first shot cracked, splitting the silence of the camp wide open. The first shot slammed into the timber above Clara's head, splintering wood into her hair. She dropped to the floor, clutching the ledger against her chest. The shack filled with dust and gun smoke, the air sharp with powder. Eli returned fire. 2 shots in quick rhythm. His revolver barked like thunder in the canyon, forcing the intruders to scatter behind rocks. One cursed, another shouted, but none pressed forward. They knew Eli's aim was truer than theirs. "Stay down," Eli hissed, reloading with practiced hands. "They'll try to flush us." Clara crawled to the hearth, pressing her back against cold stone. The ledger felt like a heartbeat in her arms. Every page screamed danger now, every name inked in it a reason for someone to kill her. She swallowed hard. "We can't hold them off forever." "We don't have to," Eli said. His eyes scanned the ruined walls, calculating. "We just need to break their line." A voice rang out from outside, bold and mocking. "Mercer, you can't win holed up in a shack. Hand over the widow and her book, and maybe we'll leave you breathing." Clara's stomach twisted. She wanted to shout, to deny them, but Eli's hand lifted, silencing her. He stepped to the gap in the wall, fired a single round, and ducked back. Dust puffed where a man's hat flew off. "They're stalling," Eli muttered, "waiting for Kincaid." At that name, Clara's blood ran cold. The gambler's shadow seemed to stretch across the desert even when he wasn't there. Another bullet cracked, tearing through the wall inches from her shoulder. Clara flinched, pressing tighter against the stone. Her voice shook but didn't break. "Eli, if they get this ledger, everyone in it dies with it." He looked at her, steady as a desert horizon. "Then they don't get it." Before she could answer, a crash shook the shack. One of Kincaid's men had hurled a lantern through the window. Glass shattered, flames spilling across dry boards. Fire crawled fast, hungry. Smoke rolled low. Clara coughed, eyes burning. "They'll burn us out." Eli grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back wall. "The mine shaft. Now." They kicked through the rotted boards, smoke swirling around them. Clara stumbled into the sunlight, choking, the canyon air sharp but clean. Behind them, the shack blazed, flames roaring skyward. Gunshots cracked. Dirt spat at their feet. Eli pushed her low, firing back with sharp, controlled bursts. One rider fell, clutching his leg, rolling in the dust. The others scattered for cover. "Run, Clara!" Eli shouted. She sprinted toward the shaft, a jagged hole in the hillside where darkness yawned. Her skirts tore against rocks, boots slipping, but she didn't stop. Eli followed, firing as he moved, until they both slid into the mouth of the mine. The darkness swallowed them whole. the noise of battle muffled by stone. Only their ragged breathing filled the shaft. Eli struck a match, its flame trembling. Shadows leapt against the walls, revealing beams warped with age, the tunnel angling deeper. This way. They pressed forward, each step echoing in the hollow dark. Behind them, faint voices cursed, but none dared follow yet. The mine was treacherous, and even Kincaid's men feared being buried alive. At last they reached a wider chamber, where old tools lay rusted in piles and a broken cart sagged on twisted rails. Eli let the match burn low, then pinched it out. Clara sank against the wall, chest heaving, smoke still stinging her lungs. The ledger pressed heavy in her arms. "We can't keep running like this." Eli's silhouette loomed against the faint seam of light from the shaft. His voice was quiet but unshaken. "We won't. Next time we take the fight to them." She looked up at him, startled. "You mean—" "Face Kincaid. I mean end this before he ends us." Silence hung between them, heavy as the earth above their heads. Clara's mind spun with fear, but also something fiercer resolve. For the first time she saw not just a gunslinger beside her, but a partner bound to the same truth she carried. Somewhere above, a coyote howled, the sound sliding into the mind like a warning. Clara pressed her palm against the ledger, and the words formed unbidden in her mind. This book doesn't just hold the past, it holds the reckoning, and reckoning was coming. The mine breathed around them, each creak of timber and distant groan of stone like a warning whispered through the dark. Clara clutched the ledger tighter, her back pressed to the damp wall. Her lungs still burned from the smoke, but it was fear that kept her awake. Eli crouched near the entrance, pistol resting loosely in his hand, his eyes sharp in the flicker of a match stub. He didn't speak for a long while, listening to the muffled voices outside. The men hadn't dared follow them in, not yet, but their patience was as dangerous as their bullets. "They'll circle the ridge," Eli said at last. "Try to catch us when we crawl out the far side. That gives us hours, maybe less." Clara nodded, though her voice felt caught in her throat. "You said we'd take the fight to them. How?" Eli struck another match, the flame trembling against his features. "There's a town 2 days north. Fort Garrison. Bigger, meaner than Dry Creek, but with men who still care about law. If we can get this ledger into the marshal's hands—" He stopped. His gaze had shifted past Clara, into the dark. From the shadows at the far end of the chamber, a voice slid like a knife. "No need to trouble the marshal, Mercer. You can hand it over right now." Clara's blood ran cold. She spun toward the sound. A figure stepped into the weak matchlight, dust-stained coat, pistol glinting, eyes alive with something between triumph and madness. Sheriff Albright. Her breath hitched. "Sheriff? How?" "Followed you from town," Albright said, tone calm. "Too calm. You weren't as quiet as you thought. And I reckon Kincaid pays better than the county." Eli rose slow, his revolver steady. "I should have guessed." Albright's grin was thin. "Guessing don't change the odds. Hand over the book, Mercer. Let the widow go free. No need for her to suffer Thomas Whitmore's mistakes." Clara's chest burned. Betrayal cut deeper than any bullet. This was the man she'd trusted to keep order in Dry Creek, the badge she'd thought shielded the weak. Now she saw only another outlaw hiding behind brass and oath. "You knew," she whispered, her voice trembling but fierce. "You knew what Thomas wrote." Albright shrugged. "Kincaid made sure I did. Ledger like that, it's a snake in the wrong hands. Safer to bury it, safer for everyone." His pistol lifted, unwavering. "Don't make me dig 2 graves to keep the peace." For a heartbeat, the mine held its breath. Dust motes danced in the glow of the dying match. Clara felt her fingers tighten around the ledger, the leather rough beneath her skin. Eli broke the silence, his voice low, steady. "You think peace is bought with silence, Sheriff, but it's bought with truth, and truth don't scare easy." Albright's eyes narrowed. "Then maybe I put it down like any other outlaw." The standoff stretched, long and merciless. Clara's pulse thundered in her ears. She knew Eli could draw faster than most men alive, but against the lawman she'd once trusted, would he? Her hand moved before her mind caught up. She hurled the ledger across the chamber. It struck the wall with a heavy thud, pages spilling loose like startled birds. Albright flinched, his pistol twitching toward the noise. In that breath, Eli moved. The chamber exploded with gunfire, the report echoing like thunder in stone. Clara ducked low, arms over her head, the scent of powder choking the air. Sparks leapt from rock, bullets ricocheted. When the smoke thinned, Albright lay sprawled against the far wall, pistol still clutched in his hand, eyes wide with disbelief. His badge glinted in the matchlight one last time before the darkness swallowed it whole. Eli lowered his revolver, chest rising hard, face shadowed with something more than victory. He made his choice. Clara crawled to the ledger, gathering the scattered pages with trembling hands. Her voice shook. The sheriff. Kincaid's reach is bigger than this town, bigger than we thought. Eli holstered his weapon, his jaw tight. Then we know what we're up against. Outside, the faint sound of hooves stirred again, echoing across the canyon. Kincaid's men hadn't left. They were waiting, patient as vultures circling overhead. Clara pressed the torn bundle to her chest, her eyes meeting Eli's. So what now? He struck another match, its flame catching in his eyes like fire on steel. Now, he said, voice low, we stop running. The match burned down to his fingers, hissed out, and left the chamber in darkness. The mine swallowed them in silence after the sheriff's fall. Clara sat in the dark, clutching the bundle of loose pages, her hands trembling though the air was cool. The smell of gunpowder clung to her hair, her clothes, her very breath. She tried to speak, but the words died against her tongue. Eli leaned against the wall, revolver across his lap, head bowed. For the first time since she met him, he looked tired. Not the kind of tired a night's rest could cure, but the kind that came from carrying ghosts too long. You killed him, Clara whispered finally. Eli's voice was rough. He killed himself when he sold his badge. The words echoed hollow in the chamber. Clara knew Eli spoke truth, yet her heart recoiled. Sheriff Albright had once been a neighbor, a man who tipped his hat when passing her husband on the street. To see him sprawled in the dirt of this mine, lifeless, it twisted something inside her. She pressed the ledger's torn pages tighter to her chest. How many more, Eli? How many more men will we bury before this ends? His jaw clenched, eyes lost in the shadows. As many as Kincaid forces us to. She turned away, her throat burning. The ledger suddenly felt cursed ink and paper bound in sorrow. It had cost her husband's life, and now the sheriff's. How many more graves would it dig? For a long while they said nothing. Only the groan of old timbers filled the silence. Clara closed her eyes, and in the darkness she saw Thomas's face, not as he'd been in life, but as she'd found him in death, blood soaking his shirt, eyes wide in the dust. She pressed her palms to her eyes until stars burst against the black. When she lowered her hands, Eli was watching her. His gaze was steady, but softer than before. You blame the book, he said quietly, don't you? Her voice cracked. Every step we take, it drags death behind us. Eli shook his head. Not the book, the men who fear it. Truth ain't the curse, Clara. It's the cure. She wanted to believe him. God help her, she did. But the faces of the dead haunted her more than any promise of justice. Above them, faint hoofbeats stirred the earth. Kincaid's men hadn't left. They waited like wolves above a trapped cave. Clara's chest tightened. They're still out there. They'll wait till we come crawling out, Eli said. His voice carried no fear, only grim certainty. Clara's resolve wavered. Then we're already dead. Eli stepped closer, crouching beside her. Look at me. She lifted her eyes to his, the firelight of his match long gone, but the intensity still there. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "Thomas knew it. That's why he left this burden with you. He believed you could carry it where he couldn't." Her lips trembled. "And if I can't? Then I'll carry it beside you." The words broke something in her, a dam she hadn't known she'd built. Tears spilled hot down her cheeks, silent, unrelenting. She hadn't cried when Thomas was buried, nor when she found the ledger. But now, in the darkness, with Eli's voice steady beside her, she wept. He didn't touch her, didn't speak again. He just waited, as if the silence itself was the only comfort worth offering. At last, her sobs eased, leaving her hollow but lighter. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. "We can't win, Eli. Not against Kincaid, not against the men who protect him." Eli rose, sliding his revolver into its holster. "We don't need to win. We just need to outlast him. Men like Kincaid burn bright, but they burn fast. The ledger is proof, and proof outlives bullets." Clara studied him, a man carved by dust and grief, standing against the weight of a world stacked crooked. For the first time, she wondered if he fought not just for his brother's ranch, but for something deeper, for a chance to believe justice wasn't dead in the desert. Above, the hoofbeats grew restless. Voices carried faintly. Shouts, laughter, threats. The men were impatient, their patience thinning like smoke in the wind. Clara hugged the ledger close. Her voice was quiet but steadier. "Then we find a way out. We don't let them decide our fate." Eli gave a short nod. "That's the spirit that scares men like Kincaid." They gathered their things, the chamber heavy with ghosts but lighter with resolve. The mine stretched into blackness ahead, the old rails leading deeper into earth. Eli struck a match. Its flame caught, flickering against the tunnel walls. He looked back at Clara, eyes bright in the glow. "Ready." She tightened her grip on the ledger. "Ready." Together, they stepped into the darkness, leaving behind the body of a sheriff who had traded his badge for silver, and carrying with them the fragile spark of defiance. The tunnel stretched like a vein through the mountain, narrow and damp. Each step echoed too loudly in Clara's ears. She held the ledger close, her knuckles white against the twine. Eli led the way, the weak glow of a lantern he'd scavenged from the shaft throwing long shadows across the beams. For hours they pressed deeper, until at last a draught of cool air whispered against their faces. Eli extinguished the flame, motioning her forward. They climbed until moonlight spilled through a jagged crack, and then freedom. The mine spat them onto a ridge overlooking the desert. The dawn had given way to a blazing noon, the sky wide and merciless. Clara squinted against the sun, breathing hard. Behind them, Dry Creek was no more than a smudge on the horizon. Eli studied the land. "We head north. Kincaid will think we've run south. Toward the border. Fort Garrison's our only chance." Clara nodded, though her chest tightened at the thought of more miles, more danger. But the ledger was heavier than any pack, and it demanded to be carried. They descended into the valley, the silence broken only by the wind and the rasp of their boots. Hours passed. When at last they paused beneath a lone mesquite, Clara sank against its trunk, exhaustion tugging at her limbs. "Eli," she said softly, "what if Fort Garrison's no better? What if the law there has already been bought, like Sheriff Albright?" Eli crouched, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Then we'll find someone who can't be bought. There's always one man left with a spine." Clara studied him, dust streaking his jaw, sweat darkening his shirt. He looked carved from the same desert that threatened to bury them, unyielding, scarred, yet still standing. Before she could reply, Eli's gaze sharpened. He drew his revolver, motioning for silence. Clara followed his eyes to the ridge above. 3 riders silhouetted against the Sunday. Her breath caught. "Kincaid's men." "No," Eli said grimly. "Kincaid himself." The gambler rode at the center, his black coat snapping in the wind, a smile sharp as a blade cutting the distance between them. On either side, 2 gunmen flanked him, rifles glinting. They reined their horses on the ridge. looking down. Kincaid tipped his hat, his voice carrying smooth as velvet. "Well now, Mercer, Mrs. Whitmore, you've saved me the trouble of digging through that mine." Clara's blood turned cold. She rose, clutching the ledger to her chest. Eli shifted closer, his stance protective, measured. Kincaid leaned on his saddle horn. "That book don't belong to you, ma'am. It belongs to men who understand how the West works, men who build empires while the rest of you scrape in the dirt." His smile widened. "Hand it over, and maybe I'll let you live long enough to see another sunrise." Clara's voice surprised her, steady, defiant. "My husband died because of this ledger, Sheriff Albright too. How many graves before you're satisfied, Kincaid?" The gambler's eyes glittered. "As many as it takes. That's the way of the frontier. Some men write history. The rest get buried under it." Eli's revolver rose, steady as a drawn breath. "Then maybe it's time you got buried." The standoff crackled in the heat. Wind whipped dust across the valley, the sky pressing low and heavy, as if the desert itself held its breath. Kincaid's smile never wavered. "Tomorrow, high noon. Silver Spur Saloon. You bring that book, Mercer. You bring the widow. We settle this the old way." He wheeled his horse, spurs flashing, his men turning with him. Dust plumed as they rode off, the echoes fading into silence. Clara's knees weakened, her back pressing against the mesquite. "He means to kill us." Eli holstered his revolver, eyes hard. "Maybe. But tomorrow isn't his to write. It's ours." Clara looked at the ledger, the twine biting into her fingers. She thought of Dry Creek, of every name inked inside, of Thomas's ghost whispering through the pages. At high noon tomorrow their fates would cross in the heart of the saloon where it all began. And in her chest, beneath the fear, Clara felt something stir, something sharp, unyielding. Not hope, not yet, but the steel of a woman who had been chased long enough and was ready to stand. The town of Dry Creek simmered under the weight of the Sunday. By late morning every shutter creaked shut, every door locked tight. Folks peered from behind curtains, whispering prayers, for they all knew what noon would bring. The Silver Spur Saloon stood at the center, its doors yawning like a gallows. Dust swirled in the street, the heat shimmering. A silence deeper than church filled the air, broken only by the groan of a sign swaying on rusted chains. Clara walked beside Eli, her dress plain but her spine straight. The ledger was bound in fresh twine, cradled in her hands like a newborn or a coffin. Every step echoed too loud on the boards of the boardwalk, a drumbeat leading her to judgment. Eli's stride was steady, his revolver tied low, the brim of his hat shadowing eyes that had already seen death waiting. He didn't look at her, but his presence was anchor enough. Inside, the saloon was already full. Men lined the walls, hushed and expectant. Cards lay abandoned on tables, whiskey glasses untouched. The piano sat silent, its keys dusty. At the far end, beneath the glow of lantern light, stood Jonas Black Jack Kincaid. His black coat gleamed with dust, his smile cut sharp and cruel. Two gunmen flanked him, but their eyes betrayed nerves. Kincaid tipped his hat, voice smooth as oil. "Mrs. Whitmore. Mercer, right on time. I admire punctuality in doomed folk." Clara held the ledger against her chest. "This ends today." Kincaid's grin widened. "Indeed it does. The only question is whose blood signs the last page." The crowd shifted, tension thick as smoke. Eli stepped forward, his boots ringing against the boards. "You called for high noon, Kincaid. Then let's have it clean. Just you and me." The gambler laughed low, savoring the sound. "You always were dramatic, Mercer. But who am I to refuse a duel written by destiny?" He waved his men back, though their hands twitched on their pistols. The room held its breath as Kincaid shrugged off his coat, revealing the polished grip of his revolver. The batwing doors creaked, letting in a shaft of sunlight that cut across the floor. A clock ticked in the silence, each second dragging like a wagon through mud. Clara's heart hammered. She clutched the ledger tighter, her knuckles white. She wanted to scream, to beg Eli not to face this man, but she knew words would not move him. The duel was already carved in stone. Kincaid stepped into the center of the room, boots squared, eyes glittering. Eli mirrored him, calm, steady. The town outside seemed to vanish. The saloon became the world. 2 men, 2 pistols, one moment that would decide everything. A hush fell so deep Clara swore she could hear her own breath, ragged and sharp. Kincaid smirked. "Last chance, Mercer. Walk away. Leave the widow. Leave the book. The desert will forget you." Eli's voice was iron. "The desert forgets men like you first." The clock struck noon. Hands blurred. The thunder of 2 pistols cracked as one, shattering silence. Lanterns flickering with the force. Clara's cry caught in her throat. Smoke filled the saloon, acrid and thick. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then a hat tumbled to the floor. Kincaid staggered, his eyes wide, a crimson bloom spreading across his chest. His pistol clattered from his grip, spinning across the boards. He gasped once, twice, then fell, his smile frozen in disbelief. The saloon erupted in shouts, chairs crashing back, boots thundering. Kincaid's gunmen raised their pistols, but Eli's revolver was already lifted. The crowd surged, tackling the men, fury long suppressed breaking free. Clara clutched the ledger, tears burning her eyes. Eli stood tall in the smoke, his chest heaving, his revolver steady. It was over. Or so it seemed, but in Clara's heart, she knew the desert never gave up its debts so easily. Kincaid's body lay sprawled across the saloon floor, lantern light painting his face pale and strange. The room still quivered with the echo of gunfire. Smoke curled to the rafters, thick and acrid, mixing with the scent of spilled whiskey and sweat. Eli holstered his revolver slow, deliberate, like a man laying a ghost to rest. Around them, townsfolk stirred from their silence, voices rising half in awe, half in relief. Clara stood in the center of it all, the ledger bound tight against her chest. For months she had lived in the shadow of secrets, her husband's death gnawing at her soul. Now, as she looked down at Kincaid's still form, she felt no triumph. Only the hollow ache of justice paid in blood. One of Kincaid's gunmen, bruised and beaten, spat on the floor. "Won't change nothing. There'll be others. Men bigger than him. Men you can't shoot down." Eli's gaze cut cold. "Then we start with the ones we can," the crowd murmured. A rancher's widow stepped forward, her eyes wet. "My husband's name. It's in that book, isn't it?" Clara hesitated, her hands trembling over the ledger. She thought of the pages filled with names, neighbors, friends, men guilty, and men desperate. To open it was to light a fire that might burn all of Dry Creek. She raised her eyes, voice steady though her heart wavered. "Yes, and the truth will come out. Every page, every lie." The widow bowed her head, tears slipping free. Around her, others whispered, fear mingling with hope. Eli touched Clara's shoulder, his voice low. "You've done what Thomas couldn't. You gave the truth a voice." She looked at him, her grief sharp but steadier now. "And the cost?" He held her gaze. "The desert always takes its due, but it can't take everything. Not if we don't let it." They stepped out into the sunlight, leaving behind the silver spur heavy with smoke and echoes. The street was nearly empty, the town holding its breath. High noon had passed, but its shadow lingered. At the edge of town, Clara paused. The desert stretched wide before her, endless and merciless. Yet in its emptiness, she felt something stir, something like freedom, or maybe just the first step toward it. She pressed the ledger to her chest, whispering to the wind, "Thomas, I'll see this through. I'll carry it further than you ever could." Eli adjusted his hat, scanning the horizon. "Where to now?" Clara looked at him, the faintest trace of resolve glinting in her eyes. "Wherever the truth needs to go." They walked into the desert, 2 figures bound not by blood, but by burden. Behind them, Dry Creek faded into dust. Ahead, the horizon shimmered vast, uncertain, open, and as the wind rose, carrying grit across the sky, it felt less like an ending than the beginning of a reckoning yet to come.